"Sir, I'll help you walk again." That child's voice rang out in front of the mall entrance. The winter wind was blowing hard, and a thin blanket was the only thing covering the legs of the man in the wheelchair. Under the neon sign with my name on it, that poor boy was gripping a small pack of wet wipes with both hands. I walked past, pretending not to see, leaning on my cane. But something in my chest gave a sharp ache. I had spent my whole life just growing my money and holding on. And in that moment all the times I had endured, fallen apart, and regretted things. Too late came rushing back. Why my heart shook so much that day. I'll tell you the story slowly from the beginning. You're listening to Silver Story Tree, where the voices of life's late chapters gently bloom again. Subscribe, like, and turn on the bell to hear more heartfelt stories that grow with time. The sound of cold winter rain tapping against the asphalt filled the air. Outside Dallas, Texas, next to the highway, the neon sign of Miller Town Center glowed against the evening sky. This was the shopping mall I'd built from a single vintage shop 40 years ago. I stood at the main entrance, leaning on my cane, and stopped to look up at it. Walking hadn't been the same since my knee surgery. Still, I wanted to see this sign with my own eyes. This building with my name on it. On the sidewalk by the entrance, a young boy in a worn-out puffer jacket stood with a small cart. He had wet wipes and candies displayed on it, calling out to passers-by. "$1 each," he said. His voice was hoarse. How long had he been out there? A little ways off, a man wrapped in a hospital blanket sat in a wheelchair, the winter wind sweeping coldly across his face. Our mall security guard approached the boy. He told him he couldn't sell things here, that this was private property. The boy answered with a catch in his voice. "Just today," he said. Please. If he didn't sell enough, his dad couldn't go to physical therapy. Then he turned to the man in the wheelchair and spoke clearly. "Dad, I'll help you walk again. I promise." The moment I heard those words, my cane slipped slightly in my hand. My knee wavered. That phrase, "walk again," seemed unusually loud in my ears. The security guard whispered that the chairman was coming and tried to manage the situation. But the boy stared at me and said it again. "Ma'am, $1 can help my dad walk again." I found my hand trembling as I tried to go inside. But then our eyes met. The boy smiled a small smile and said it once more. "Ma'am, I really will help him walk again." His eyes were so clear. They looked exactly like mine had, 40 years ago. When I opened my first shop and looked in the mirror, I walked into the mall and warm air from the heaters wrapped around my face. Christmas carols were playing, and people walked by with shopping bags, laughing. But I kept turning around. Through the glass doors, I could see that boy's back. He was pulling his small cart, waving at another passerby. Something inside my chest was crumbling. Even in the elevator going up, those words wouldn't leave my mind. Walk again. Someone out there was collecting dollar bills with that kind of desperation. And here I was, signing multi-million-dollar contracts in my office at the top of this building. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. When had it happened? When did I start seeing only numbers instead of people? On my way back to the parking lot, the rain was still falling. As I pulled out my car keys, I looked up. The entrance area was empty now. The boy and the wheelchair were gone. Only the wet sidewalk remained. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at that spot. My hands on the steering wheel had no strength. That whole drive home, I kept thinking about the boy's voice. I felt like I'd been forgetting something important. It was past 8 when I got home. My single-family house in the Dallas suburbs was quiet. This house where my husband and I had lived for 30 years had become a house where I lived alone. I turned on the kitchen light and opened the refrigerator. There was leftover chicken soup from yesterday. The sound of the microwave turning echoed through the empty kitchen. On the wall hung old photographs. A black and white picture of me as a young woman, holding up the sign for my little vintage shop in a downtown alley, smiling. Next to it was a photo from the opening ceremony of the first Miller department store. Back then, I had dreams. I wanted to sell good products at fair prices, to create a store where neighbors could drop by comfortably. What had happened to all that? I'd become the chairman of a $500 million shopping mall. But I hadn't even noticed a boy collecting dollar bills right in front of it. On the dining table sat my blood pressure, medication and pain pills for my knee, lined up in a row. I turned on the television while eating dinner. The local news was reporting on Christmas season consumer trends. That's when my smartphone rang. It was my son, Eric. He was calling on video chat. Eric told me tomorrow's board meeting was important. Everything was finally being transferred to his name. My daughter-in-law Rachel leaned into the frame and said I should also visit an assisted living facility. Living alone was getting dangerous, she said. I asked them why they were already talking about a nursing home when I could still drive myself and walk around the mall. The air on the screen grew heavy. Rachel spoke in a gentle voice. Estate taxes were an issue, she said, and we needed to consolidate the structure to secure the grandchildren's future. We had to merge all the shares and real estate cleanly. She went on, listing tax issues one after another. Instead of answering, I just sighed. Eric spoke again. Mom, just sign the papers tomorrow. Trust me, he said. After I hung up, the house felt even quieter. I could only hear the refrigerator motor and the ticking of the wall clock. I walked to the old study. I pulled out a file box from under my husband's desk. It was covered in dust. Inside, I found a thin folder. The cover read Boiler Room Incident. The date said 2017. Just as I was about to open the folder, my phone buzzed with a text alert. It was Eric. Mom, just sign the papers tomorrow. Trust me. It was a short message, but something about it felt unsettling. Why was he rushing me like this? Why did he keep asking me to trust him? I opened the folder. Inside were a few pages of a report, but something was strange. There were blank pages, and some lines had been blacked out. It looked like someone had deliberately tampered with it. At that moment, the man in the wheelchair I'd seen today came to mind. Could he somehow be connected to an accident at our mall? The night grew late, but I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. What would my husband have said if he were still alive? He'd always told me to think of people first. When had I forgotten that? In the darkness, I could almost hear that boy's voice again. The promise to help his father walk again. Early the next morning, I put on my coat, grabbed my cane, and left the house. I called an Uber and headed to an old office building downtown Dallas. It was a small law office on the 6th floor. The door read James Carter, attorney at law. He'd been my friend for 40 years. I rang the bell and James opened the door. The smell of coffee drifted into the hallway. He smiled and said, "Susan, you only come to see me when something's really wrong." I gave him a bitter smile and went inside. He brought out coffee and asked what was going on. I told him about what I'd seen yesterday at the mall. The boy selling wet wipes and his father in the wheelchair. I also mentioned the boiler room accident file I'd found at home. James nodded as he listened. Then he asked if I thought that father's accident might have happened at my mall. I pulled the file from my bag and handed it to him. James slowly turned the pages. He pointed to the blank sections with his finger and said someone had tampered with this report. There was likely an original version somewhere else. He checked the name of the person who'd been managing the facilities team back then. We went to a nearby cafe. We were meeting a retired security chief. He glanced around carefully, then placed an old USB drive on the table. "Thought you might need this someday," he said. My hands were trembling. Back at the law office, we plugged the USB into the computer. Files opened up. They were CCTV recordings. The boiler room alarm light had been left off, ignored. An email approving a postponement of the inspection appeared on screen. At the top of the email was the name Eric Miller, my son's name. The video continued playing. A man rushed into the boiler room trying to prevent danger. Then he collapsed in an explosion. The screen shook, and smoke filled the air. That man was the owner of the wheelchair I'd seen yesterday. I gripped my cane tightly. My hand tensed. I muttered to myself, if my son knew about this and buried it anyway, that's no longer a mistake. James spoke quietly. "Susan, this isn't just a family matter. This could be a major legal problem." I looked out the window. People were hurrying along the Dallas streets. They all had their own lives, families, things to protect. That man must have been the same. Going to work every day for his son, trying to support his family. And we'd taken away his legs. James asked what I was going to do. I slowly turned my head. I said I needed to meet that man first. Apologized to him directly, hear what had happened. James nodded. Then he warned me to be careful. Your son will try to stop you if he finds out. On my way out of the office, my phone rang. It was Eric. Where are you, Mom? He asked. You need to be there before the board meeting starts. I answered briefly. I'll be there soon. After hanging up, I looked at James. He patted my shoulder lightly. Be strong, he said. James and I drove about 20 minutes from downtown Dallas. It was a small rehabilitation hospital next to an old strip mall. We parked and walked toward the hospital, my heart pounding. The hallway smelled of disinfectant, and the fluorescent lights felt cold. From behind the door of a room at the end of the corridor, I heard a voice. It was that boy. He was massaging his father's legs and talking. Just a little more strength, Dad. We'll get there soon. There was determination in his voice. I knocked carefully on the door. Someone answered from inside. Come in. I opened the door and the man in the wheelchair looked up at me. It was the same person I'd seen yesterday at the mall. Noah, the boy, looked at me with surprise. I spoke as naturally as I could. I said I'd come from the mall, that I was concerned. The man asked cautiously who I was. I introduced myself simply as a concerned elderly woman. James greeted him lightly beside me. After a moment's hesitation, the man spoke. His name was Daniel Brooks. He'd worked on the facilities team at Miller Town Center a few years ago. I asked slowly what had happened then. Daniel sighed. Then he began to talk. The alarm had been broken for weeks, he said. He'd filed multiple requests for inspection. But every time he only heard that there was no budget right now. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old folded document. It was a copy of the workers' compensation settlement. He pointed to a line with his finger. At first, there was lifelong rehabilitation therapy support, he said. But one day, that part disappeared. The person who went into the meeting that day was Eric, he added. My heart sank. James took a photo of the document with his phone. I asked Daniel why he hadn't said anything. He shook his head. He had a son, he said. He was afraid that if he fought, he might lose even this. Noah held his father's hand and spoke. Ma'am, do you work at the mall? My dad told me the person who first built that mall cared about people. I wonder what happened to her. Hearing those words, my throat tightened. I couldn't speak. I barely managed to say something. That person is still alive, I said. She just had her eyes closed for a while. Now she's trying to open them again. Noah tilted his head, but I couldn't say anything more. On our way out of the room, James spoke quietly. Susan, this is more serious than we thought. Not just legally problematic, but morally unacceptable. I nodded. That evening, I went to my bank safety deposit box. I took out an envelope my husband had left. On the outside, in his handwriting, it said if someone gets hurt, help them stand first. The mall can wait. I opened the envelope. Inside was a draft of a will. There was also a note my husband had written. The real owner of this mall should be the people who keep it running. Not the name on the corner office, it read. I stared at that paper for a long time. What would my husband have said if he were alive? He probably would have told me to think about whether I'd built a building or built people's lives. That's when I finally realized what I'd been missing. The board meeting was tomorrow. I made my decision. No more hiding. A few days later, at the Miller Town Center headquarters. Building, 15th floor boardroom. Texas winter sunlight poured through the glass windows. Eric and Rachel stood beside the investors, presentation remote in hand. They were smiling, preparing slides about the next phase of expansion. The conference room was buzzing with energy. I wore a navy suit, more formal than usual, and walked in slowly, carrying a small briefcase. The sound of my shoe heels clicking against the marble floor echoed. Eric saw me and smiled broadly. Today, my mother will officially retire, he said. He asked everyone to applaud. Just as the board members were about to clap, I raised my hand. Before that, I'd like everyone to watch a short video, I said. The air in the conference room seemed to stop. The smile disappeared from Eric's face. James plugged a USB into the large screen at the back of the room. The video began to play. CCTV footage from the boiler room appeared. You could see the alarm light was off, ignored. Emails repeatedly requesting postponement of inspections appeared one after another. Then an approver's name appeared large in the center of the screen. Eric Miller. My son's name. The board members held their breath, staring at the screen. Next, workers' compensation settlement documents appeared. The before and after versions were shown side by side. The disappearance of the phrase lifelong rehabilitation support was clearly visible. James explained in a quiet but clear voice. These changes were made after Mr. Brooks signed. Without his knowledge, Eric's face went pale. He stood up and spoke. Mom, this is taken out of context. I was protecting the company, he said. His voice was shaking. Rachel tried to say something too, but only her mouth opened and closed. I spoke firmly. Protecting the company doesn't mean breaking someone's legs and silencing them. That man is still sitting in a wheelchair in front of our mall right now. The conference room went quiet. Several board members lowered their heads. The CFO asked cautiously, Chairman, what do you intend to do? I opened my briefcase and pulled out documents. It was a copy of the will my husband had left. I also took out a plan I'd newly drafted. I spoke slowly. We need to make this right. We'll provide proper compensation to the Brooks family and create an employee stock ownership program to show who the real owners of this company are. Eric shouted, What happens to us then? What about the kids? I looked directly at my son. I acknowledge you worked hard, I said. But you don't have the right to work by destroying someone's life. That's not work, that's a crime. My voice echoed through the conference room. The board meeting went into recess. People murmured as they filed into the hallway. I sat in my chair and looked out the window. Far in the distance, I could see the mall parking lot. Somewhere out there, Noah and Daniel would be. My chest felt heavy thinking about it. James sat down next to me. You're doing well, he said. Your husband would be proud. I nodded. This is just the beginning, I replied. The really hard part starts now. The meeting resumed. Voting began. Some opposed, but most raised their hands for my proposal. Considering the legal risks and public opinion, they had no other choice. Eric agreed to step down as CEO. His back as he left the conference room looked broken. During the break, only Eric, Rachel, James, and I remained in a small conference room. When the door closed, the noise from outside was blocked. Only the low hum of the air conditioner could be heard. I spread my husband's will on the table. His handwriting remained intact. I read it slowly. Your father never wanted you to own everything. He wanted you to share it with the people who built this place. Eric covered his face with his hands and spoke. So what, we just give the company away? What about what I did? What about my kids? I answered quietly but firmly. You worked hard, that's true. But you don't have the right to work by destroying someone's life. That's not legitimate effort. Rachel waved a memo and spoke. Susan, estate taxes will kill us. If we start dividing shares, we lose control. The children lose security. I shook my head. Losing our souls is worse than losing control. We already lost part of it the day we ignored that accident. Rachel bit her lip. Eric slumped in his chair. I pulled out the newly drafted will. It contained plans for an employee stock ownership program, a workers' injury support foundation, and a Brooks family trust. I explained slowly. We'll distribute certain shares this way. Eric asked, What's left for me then? I answered, Your conscience, and a chance to start over. If you're truly capable, you can succeed even starting clean again. Eric couldn't say anything and covered his face with his hands. His shoulders were shaking. I continued speaking. I hid too, behind reports and numbers, pretending not to hear people crying. That's my sin. Now I'm starting to pay that debt. My voice wavered briefly. Rachel muttered, You're throwing everything away. I looked at her. I'm not throwing away money, I said. I'm finding people. If you don't understand that difference, you'll be unhappy for life. Just then, James's phone rang. He looked at the screen and spoke. It's Daniel Brooks. He has something he wants to say to the board. On video. I nodded. Connect him. Moments later, the rehabilitation hospital room appeared on the conference room screen. Daniel sat in his wheelchair and greeted us carefully. In a trembling voice, he began to speak. He never wanted to sue anyone. He just wanted to walk again and keep his job. If someone had just listened when he reported the broken alarm, none of this would have happened. His eyes on screen looked moist. I looked at the screen and spoke. Mr. Brooks, I'm sorry I took so long to listen. But I'm listening now. Eric raised his head and looked at the screen. He opened his mouth and closed it repeatedly. Finally, in a small voice, he spoke. I'm sorry. As those words fell, the room went quiet. Even Rachel said nothing more. At that day's board meeting, I officially announced the new will draft and share restructuring plan. Some board members resisted, but considering the evidence, public opinion, and legal risks, they ultimately had to accept my proposal. A vote was held, and it passed with more than a majority. The company immediately submitted accident records to OSHA and the State Labor Department. Hidden documents were revealed and an investigation began. The media started taking interest too. Among employees, there was stirring. Rumors spread that the founder had returned. A few days later, I met Daniel again. This time, James and the company's legal team came along. We brought a settlement agreement promising proper workers' compensation, additional damages, and lifelong rehabilitation support. Daniel's hands trembled as he read the documents. He asked, "Is this real?" I nodded. "This should have been done long ago," I said. Daniel wiped away tears and spoke. "Thank you." Now he could give his son hope. Noah beside him held his father's hand tightly. I looked at Noah. I asked if he remembered what he said in front of them all. That he'd help his dad walk again. Noah nodded. I told him he'd already done it. Your courage lifted all of us up. When I returned to the company, the employees looked different. When we passed in the hallway, they made eye contact and greeted me. Before, they'd only bowed their heads. Someone approached me quietly and said the founder hadn't abandoned them after all. My chest felt warm. I created a new foundation. It was called the Walk Again Foundation. Its purpose was to help people injured at work. The Brooks family was designated as the first beneficiary. Noah's eyes welled up when he received the decision letter. "See, Dad? I told you someone would listen." James stopped me in the hallway. He spoke quietly. "Your husband's will is finally being honored. Maybe it's time you lived for yourself a little too," he asked. I smiled bitterly. "It's too early to rest," I replied. On my way back to the office, I passed by the mall. I looked at the sidewalk by the entrance. That's where Noah had stood with his cart a few weeks ago. Now no one was there. The empty sidewalk sparkled in the evening sunlight. That scene looked somehow peaceful. I stopped the car and gazed at that spot for a moment. The mall's neon signs began lighting up one by one. The words Miller Town Center glowed. Before, that had been my pride. Now it felt like responsibility. Heavy, but not in a bad way. On my way home, I sent Eric a text. "Start over slowly. Mom believes in you." A while later, a reply came. "Thank you. I'll try." It was a short message, but I could feel the sincerity. A few months passed. A new rehabilitation center opened at a community hospital outside Dallas. It was called the Walk Again Center. The Texas winter sky was high and clear that day. A small plaque hung at the entrance. It read money should help people stand, not help them lie more comfortably. On the day of the opening ceremony, I sat in a wheelchair. Though my condition had improved after knee surgery, it was still uncomfortable. But my expression was peaceful. James stood beside me quietly, watching people. Warm afternoon sunlight touched our faces. Noah came running in new sneakers. He pushed his father's wheelchair into the rehabilitation room. A physical therapist greeted Daniel. The wheelchair was positioned in front of parallel bars. Daniel gripped the handrails tightly. The therapist supported his waist. I could hear the sound of him taking a deep breath. Daniel slowly stood up. His legs trembled, but he held firm. He moved one foot forward. Then another. It was slow, but he was definitely walking. People around us held their breath and watched. Noah spoke with emotion in his voice. "See, Dad? I told you. I'd help you walk again." That voice echoed through the rehabilitation room. Daniel stopped and looked at his son. His eyes reddened. "Thank you," he whispered. I watched that scene and my eyes grew warm. The words I'd heard months ago at the mall entrance came back to me. That promise to help his father walk again. The boy had done it. And in that process, I'd been lifted back up too. James patted my shoulder lightly. "Well done," he said. I shook my head. "It was too late," I replied. He smiled and said even being late matters. "You could have not come at all." As I walked through the center, I thought, what was my dream when I opened that small shop 40 years ago? To make lots of money? To build big buildings? No. It was to see people find what they needed and go home smiling. When did I forget that? As the numbers grew larger, as the buildings grew taller, people's faces seemed to get smaller. I couldn't see anything beyond the reports. I lived that way for years. Until I met Noah. I approached Daniel. I stood up from my wheelchair and walked slowly, leaning on my cane. I gently patted his shoulder. I said I was sorry for being late. Daniel shook his head. He was grateful I came at all. Noah took my hand. He asked if I'd walk again too. I smiled and answered, I'm already walking, just in a different direction than before. Noah tilted his head but smiled brightly. I looked out the window. The sunset was falling. The sky was turning orange. I stared at that light for a long time. And I muttered to myself. I built a shopping mall, but I'd forgotten why I started. It wasn't for bigger numbers. It was for people like him who were building their lives. On my way out of the center, a message came to my phone. It was Eric. He'd started a small consulting company. This time he wanted to do it right. I sent a reply. You'll do well. Take it slow. My son was starting over. I sat in the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I took one last look at the center. Lights were turning on one by one. The sign for the Walk Again Center glowed. That light looked warm. On the way home, I turned on the radio. An old song came on. It was one my husband had loved. I sang along quietly. My voice trembled, but it was okay. I knew now that I wasn't alone. You see, there's something I learned late in life. If you have money, you can buy a nicer bed. You can live in a bigger house. But what really matters is that the money shouldn't be a pillow for someone lying down, but a stepping stone for someone trying to stand back up. That sentence I heard at the mall entrance. The promise to help his father walk again. I finally understand what it really meant. Love is walking together, lifting up someone who's fallen, holding hands and moving forward one step at a time. It felt like going back to that day 40 years ago when I opened my small shop. I'm starting over, this time doing it right. While seeing people, that's the last thing I learned. Everyone, have you ever felt torn between money and family? Through all of this, I've learned that it's not how much you pile up, but where you choose to spend it that truly matters. Money only gains real value when it helps someone who has fallen stand up again. I realized it late, but it's not too late. And we still have the courage and hope to choose differently at any time. If you feel something from this story, I'd be grateful if you could share your thoughts and experiences in the comments, so we can be a comfort to one another. If today's story left you with even a little gratitude or courage, please support the channel with a like and a subscription. And if someone comes to mind, quietly pass this story along to them. Thank you sincerely for listening to the end. And I hope your tomorrow, your health, and your heart are gently filled with peace.